The microphone made a soft pop when he took it from the officiant, and that small sound, amplified through the cathedral's sound system, bounced off 800 years of stone vaulting and stained glass, was the sound of my life changing. The Cathedral of St. Edvard in Vienna seated 800 people. Every seat was filled. The pews were dressed in white silk ribbon and arrangements of ivory roses and eucalyptus that had cost more than most people's monthly salaries. The late afternoon light came through the rose window above the altar in fractured colors, deep blue and gold and burgundy, and fell across the white marble floor in patterns that looked, from above, like a mosaic of a different life than the one currently being assembled in front of 800 witnesses. I was standing at the altar in a dress that had taken 4 months to make. Ivory silk, hand-embroidered with a pattern of small flowers along the bodice and train. The work of an atelier in Paris, whose name I had chosen randomly from a list because I could not very well ask the royal household couturier without answering questions I was not prepared to answer. The dress was beautiful. I was not thinking about the dress. I was thinking about the look on James Whitmore's face when he picked up the microphone. Not nervousness, not emotion, not the specific expression of a man who is about to say his vows and is feeling the weight of the moment. The look on James Whitmore's face was something else. It was the look of a man who has been planning something for a long time and has arrived at the moment of execution. He turned to the 800 guests. He smiled, and then he said, "I am sorry to interrupt the ceremony, but I need to be honest with everyone here. I cannot marry this woman." The cathedral went silent. What would you do if the man you had spent 2 years loving, the man you had agreed to stand beside at an altar in a silk dress in front of 800 people, what would you do if he picked up a microphone and told the room that he could not marry you because you were, in his exact words, a financial deadweight with nothing to offer? What would you do if he said it laughing, if he said it with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it and found it entertaining? If he gestured while he said it toward a woman in the front row, a woman you had seen at 6 different events over the past year, always watching, always positioned slightly too close to your fiancé, and announced that he would be leaving with her instead because she was a Vandermeer, and the Vandermeers had a shipping empire worth $20 billion. And that was the kind of alliance a man with ambition needed. What would you do if some of the guests laughed? What would you do if you did not move, did not cry, did not make a sound? And what would you do if you knew, with the absolute certainty of someone who had been raised to understand that power operates on a timeline of its own choosing, that the vast arched doors of the Cathedral of St. Edvard were about to open, and that the person walking through them would make everything that had just happened in this room look like a minor disagreement at a school play? I knew, so I stood at the altar. I kept my hands still. I kept my face composed. I let James Whitmore finish his speech, and I waited. But you need to understand how we got here. You need to understand who I was before I was standing at this altar, and what I gave up to stand here, and why. My name is Clara Elise Adelaide von Hartenberg. I am the only grandchild of His Imperial Majesty Emperor Friedrich III of Hartenberg, sovereign of the Imperial State of Hartenberg, a constitutional empire in Central Europe that has been continuously governed by the House of Hartenberg since the 11th century. The empire encompasses a territory the size of Austria, a population of 12 million people, and a sovereign wealth structure built across centuries of strategic acquisition, natural resource management, and dynastic financial planning that is valued, in its totality, at approximately 940 billion euros. My grandfather is 78 years old. He is 193 centimeters tall. He has been the Emperor of Hartenberg for 41 years. He is the most quietly terrifying person I have ever known, and I have known heads of state, prime ministers, and one man who once held a monopoly on global rare earth mineral supply. I was raised in the imperial palace in the capital city of Hartenberg, along with my mother, my grandfather's only daughter, and my father, who was a diplomat from a distinguished family and who died when I was 11 in the kind of accident that does not care what title is on your birth certificate. After that, it was my grandfather and me, and the palace, and the work. I was not a princess in the technical sense. The Hartenberg imperial succession runs through a specific constitutional line, and I held a title, Her Serene Highness, a rank below the direct imperial succession. That was significant without being the top of the structure. But my grandfather had no male heirs, and my mother had no interest in governance. And by the time I was 22, everyone at court understood that I was, in practical terms, being prepared to inherit the most significant private imperial wealth structure in Europe. This knowledge that I was being shaped for something enormous made it almost impossible to know whether anyone wanted me for myself. The men I met at court events or state functions, they knew the title. They knew the inheritance. They knew the weight of the Hartenberg name. And so every interaction was colored by, every expression of interest or affection potentially contaminated by the awareness of what was at stake. I needed to know if someone could love me without knowing any of it. So at 27, I did what my grandfather considered, and still considers, the most reckless thing I have ever done. I left. I constructed an identity. Clara Hartley, Austrian national, graduate student in musicology at the University of Vienna. Modest inheritance, no family of significance. The identity was built with the help of one trusted member of the imperial household staff who understood both the reason and the risk. I rented a flat near the university. I enrolled in graduate courses I genuinely found interesting. I worked part-time at a small concert hall in the city, selling programs and managing the box office, because I wanted to have a job that paid me a wage I had earned, and I wanted to understand what that felt like. My grandfather was not happy. He called me every week. He said, "Clara, you are being theatrical." I said, "I am being human, grandfather. Give me time." He gave me 18 months. This, from a man whose patience operates on a generational scale, was actually a significant concession. I met James Whitmore 7 months into my disappearance. He was at a chamber music concert at the Concert House, a Brahms program, a string quartet I had been following since their debut recording. And he was there because a colleague had given him a ticket, and he had decided, at the last minute, to go. He sat 2 seats from me. He listened with the concentrated attention of someone who was not familiar with the repertoire, but was determined to be. At the intermission, he turned to me and said, "I have no idea what I am listening to, but I think something is happening to me." I said, "That is the second movement of the Brahms Opera 51. It tends to do that." He laughed. The laugh was genuine, self-deprecating, the laugh of someone who was comfortable not knowing things and willing to learn. He introduced himself. He was 32 years old, the CEO of a technology firm that made enterprise software for logistics companies. He was Viennese by birth, educated in London and New York, and he had the particular energy of someone who worked hard and moved fast and was constantly calculating, but had not yet allowed the calculation to take over everything. He asked my name. I said Clara Hartley. He asked what I did. I said I was finishing a graduate degree in musicology and worked at a box office. He said that sounded like a good life, and he said it without condescension, as someone who was simply assessing information. We talked through the entire second half of the concert without watching it. He called the next morning. We had dinner that week. A Viennese restaurant near the Ring, not expensive but good, and he was easy to talk to in the specific way that people who think quickly are easy to talk to when they are also listening. He asked about music. I explained things I loved about Brahms, about the architecture of his chamber works, about the way he built toward resolutions that never quite arrived. James said, "He sounds like a man who was never satisfied." I said, "He was a man who understood that the journey was the point." James thought about that for a moment. Then he said, "I think I might need to listen to more Brahms." We dated for 6 months before he told me he loved me. We were in my flat, reading, a Sunday afternoon. And he looked up from his book and said it with the directness of someone who had thought about whether to say it and decided that not saying it was the worst option. I said it back. It felt true. He met my graduate school friends. He came to concerts. He learned over time to listen to music with the patience of someone who is working to understand something they were not raised to appreciate. He talked about his company, its growth, its challenges, the specific pleasure of building something from a small team into an organization of 400 people. He was proud of it in a way that felt earned. I was happy in the way that people are happy before they are tested. The testing began in the second year. James's company, Whitmore Systems, was pursuing a significant acquisition, a logistics AI firm based in Berlin that would double the company's addressable market and position it for an international expansion that James had been planning for 3 years. The acquisition required capital. Capital required investors. Investors required James to be, at all times, performing the role of successful, connected, serious operator. And Clara Hartley, graduate student and box office worker, did not fit that performance. He did not say so directly. He was never direct about it. What he did was begin to compartmentalize. He stopped bringing me to work events. He started, when the topic came up, describing me to colleagues in terms that minimized my presence in his life. A friend he was seeing, a graduate student, someone he had met at a concert. His mother was more direct. Gertrude Whitmore was 68 years old and had the specific social energy of a woman who had spent decades converting her son's success into her own status. She dressed in a rotation of designer labels, Heiress, Gucci, Brioni, and wore jewelry that was chosen for visibility rather than taste. She had opinions about everything and expressed them with the cheerful aggression of someone who has never faced a consequence for saying exactly what she thought. She met me at a family dinner 4 months before the wedding. She shook my hand, looked at my clothes, a simple blue dress, plain, the kind of thing Clara Hartley wore because it fit her budget, and said, "James tells me you study music. How sweet. Will that ever become something practical?" I said, "I hope to teach." She said, the sound of someone filing information in the category of irrelevant. Over the following months, she escalated. She made comments about my appearance, always framed as concern, always plausibly deniable. She suggested I might want to invest in a wardrobe before the wedding because the press would be there and James's profile was rising. She said this at a lunch where 3 of her friends were present, and the 3 friends nodded supportively, and I looked at her and said, "I appreciate the thought, Gertrude," and said nothing else. James, when I mentioned these interactions, said his mother was old-fashioned. He said she meant well. He said I needed to understand that image mattered in the world he was operating in, and that it would help if I could find a way to be part of that image rather than a complication to it. I said, "You want me to change how I dress so your mother's friends are comfortable?" He said, "I want you to think about how things look." I said, "Things look fine, James." He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, "Sometimes I feel like you do not understand what I am trying to build." "I understand it very well," I said. "I am asking whether you understand what you are doing while you build it." He did not answer. We moved to a different subject. We always moved to a different subject. The woman in the front row was named Isabel Vandermeer. She was 30 years old, the only child of the Vandermeer shipping family, and she had appeared in James's orbit approximately 11 months before the wedding through a series of business introductions that James described as coincidental. She was tall, blonde, and always perfectly dressed in the aggressive way that very wealthy people dress when they want you to know immediately what you are dealing with. She wore a ring at every event that looked like a family heirloom, and probably was. She spoke 4 languages and dropped this fact into conversation with a regularity that suggested she thought it was impressive rather than ordinary. I had seen her at 6 events over 11 months. She was always near James. She was always positioned with the specific intentionality of someone who knows exactly where she is standing and why. I mentioned her to James twice. Both times, He said she was a potential business connection, someone whose family's logistics network could be valuable to Whitmore Systems. I said, I am sure that is true. I watched him the way I had been trained, from childhood to watch rooms. I watched the way he turned toward her at events, the way his phone was sometimes face down in situations where it was usually face up. The way, over the last 4 months before the wedding, he began to seem like a man who was already living a decision he had not yet announced. I told my grandfather 2 weeks before the wedding. I called the palace. I spoke to him directly. I said, Grandfather, I think something is going to happen at the ceremony. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, What kind of something? I said, The kind that ends it. He said, And you want me there? I said, I want you there. He said, I will need to bring the guard. I said, I know. He said, Clara, are you certain you want to see this through? We could prevent it. I said, No, let it happen. All the way. I need them to go all the way. He was quiet again. Then he said, You are very much like your grandmother. I said, I will take that. He said, I will be there. So on the morning of my wedding, I dressed in the handmade silk gown. I allowed the palace dressers, who had traveled to Vienna under the pretense of being hired hair and makeup staff, to prepare me. I walked down the aisle of the Cathedral of St. Edvard, past 800 guests who believed they were watching the marriage of a young woman named Clara Hartley to a technology entrepreneur who was, by all visible evidence, deeply in love with her. I walked past Isabel Vandermeer in the front pew. She was wearing a white dress, not ivory, not cream, but white, and I noted it with the careful precision of someone who notes everything. I stood at the altar. I looked at James. He looked at me, and for one moment, just one, I thought I saw something in his face that might have been regret, the specific regret of someone who has made a decision and knows it is wrong and is going to do it anyway because the calculation has already been completed. Then he took the microphone. He spoke for 4 minutes. I timed it by the cathedral clock above the nave. He said he could not marry me because I was a dead weight. His phrase, delivered with a laugh. A woman with no money, no connections, no family of significance, and no future that was useful to him. He said this with the ease of someone who had rehearsed it and found the rehearsal satisfying. He said that Isabel Vandermeer was a woman who understood ambition, who came from a family that matched his vision, who represented the kind of alliance that made business sense as well as personal sense. Some of the guests laughed, not many, but some. The particular laugh of people who are embarrassed and covering it with performance. James reached down from the altar and took Isabel's hand. She stood. She was smiling. The white dress made a soft sound as she moved. I stood at the altar. I did not move. I did not cry. I looked at him with the expression I had been trained to use in situations that required composure under extreme pressure, which is to say, no expression at all. A face as still and unreadable as the marble floor. The laughter faded. The room went quiet. And then the cathedral doors opened. Not slowly, not ceremonially. They opened the way things open when the people opening them are not asking permission and do not need to. They were 12 feet high, those doors, solid oak, reinforced with iron, and they opened simultaneously with a sound like the first chord of an organ, massive, resonant, defining the space. 20 imperial guards of Hartenberg entered first. They wore the full ceremonial uniform, midnight blue with gold braid, silver button, the Hartenberg eagle on the shoulder. They were not armed visibly, but they moved with the specific stillness of people who are trained for situations that require immediate, decisive response. And they filled the nave in 2 lines that created a corridor from the doors to the altar. Behind them came 4 senior aides in dark suits, each carrying a leather briefcase stamped with the imperial crest. And then, walking between the 2 lines of guards, came my grandfather. Emperor Friedrich III of Hartenberg was 78 years old and 193 centimeters tall. He was wearing the imperial formal uniform, navy blue, gold-braided, with the sash of the Order of Hartenberg across his chest and the imperial star on his left breast. He walked without a cane. He walked without haste. He walked with the absolute, unhurried confidence of a man who has governed a nation for 41 years and has never once, in those 41 years, needed to raise his voice to be heard. He was the most commanding physical presence I had ever seen in my life, and I had grown up beside him. The 800 guests did not speak. They did not move. Several people near the aisle instinctively stood, operating on some deep social instinct that tells you when something requires that gesture. My grandfather walked the length of the cathedral in silence. He reached the altar. He looked at me. He looked at James. He looked at Isabel. He looked at James again. He said, at a conversational volume that somehow reached every corner of the 800-year-old space, I understand there has been an announcement. James had gone white. He was holding the microphone. His hand was shaking slightly, which I could see because I was 3 feet from him, and I was watching everything. "Who are you?" James said. His voice was barely audible. "I am His Imperial Majesty Emperor Friedrich III of Hartenberg," my grandfather said. "Clara is my granddaughter. She is Her Serene Highness Clara Elise Adelaide von Hartenberg, and she is the primary heir of the Imperial House of Hartenberg." He paused. "And you have just publicly humiliated her in front of 800 people." The silence in the cathedral had a weight to it now. Not the silence of people waiting for something. The silence of people who have understood that what they are witnessing is not a scene from someone else's life, but an event with structural consequences. James opened his mouth. He closed it. My grandfather looked at Isabel. "Miss Vandermeer," he said, "I believe your family operates a shipping enterprise called the Vandermeer Maritime Group, headquartered in Amsterdam. 47 vessels, 12 port contracts in 7 countries, and an annual revenue of approximately 3.2 billion euros. Isabel looked at him with the expression of someone who is trying to maintain composure and is failing. "Yes," she said. "You are perhaps unaware," my grandfather said, "that 3 of your 12 port contracts are operated through a licensing agreement with the Hartenberg Maritime Authority, which is a regulatory body under imperial jurisdiction. You are perhaps also unaware that the Vandermeer Maritime Group's primary line of credit, 420 million euros, arranged through the Continental Banking Consortium of Zurich, is underwritten by the Imperial Reserve Fund of Hartenberg, which is an entity under my direct authority." Isabel had gone pale. The specific pale of someone whose financial foundation has just been explained to them in terms they cannot argue with. "The Vandermeer Maritime Group," my grandfather continued, "is not, as you perhaps believed, an independent empire. It is a company that exists on land that is, in the most precise legal sense, leased from my house. I simply did not previously find it necessary to make that point." He turned to one of the aides beside him, who opened a briefcase and removed a single document. "I find it necessary now." He looked at James. "Whitmore Systems, Enterprise Software. Berlin acquisition currently in due diligence, requiring a capital commitment of 240 million euros. The lead investor in your Series D round, the one currently processing that commitment, is a fund called Alpine Meridian Capital. You know it as a Swiss institutional investor. You do not know it as a wholly owned subsidiary of the Hartenberg Imperial Investment Office." He paused. "Until approximately 90 seconds ago, that investment commitment was proceeding normally. As of this moment, it is withdrawn." James was staring at my grandfather with an expression that was no longer white. It was gray. The gray of someone whose understanding of their own situation has been fundamentally revised. "The Berlin acquisition," my grandfather said, "cannot proceed without that capital. Without the Berlin acquisition, Whitmore Systems misses its internationalization window by at least 3 years, during which time 2 competitors will have occupied the market you intended to enter." He paused. "You have also, this morning, publicly declared that my granddaughter is a financial deadweight with nothing to offer. I want the record to be clear on the precise inversion of that characterization." He turned to the aide with the briefcase. He took the document. He looked at it for a moment, a single look, almost casual, and then he handed it to the aide beside him and said a single word in German that I recognized as the word for finalize. The aide nodded. He produced a phone. He made a call. He spoke for 12 seconds. He ended the call. He looked at my grandfather. "Done, Your Imperial Majesty." My grandfather looked at James. "The Alpine Meridian withdrawal will be processed before close of business today. The Hartenberg Maritime Authority will be notifying the Vandermeer Group of a regulatory review of their port licensing agreements, which will suspend 3 of their 12 contracts pending a compliance audit that is expected to take 14 months. He looked at Isabel. "I suggest you inform your father immediately. He will want to begin arranging alternative financing, though I suspect he will find the market less accommodating than expected once the circumstances of this morning become known." Isabel looked like she had swallowed something sharp. Her face had the specific expression of someone who has just understood that the empire they thought they were marrying into was from the perspective of the room's actual power, a subsidiary. My grandfather turned to me. He held out his arm. I stepped forward. I took his arm. I looked at James one last time. He was standing at the altar in his morning suit, and he looked very young and very small and very alone. Isabel was beside him, but she was not looking at him. She was staring at the floor with the expression of someone recalculating. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt something more complete and quieter than satisfaction. I felt the specific clarity that arrives when a question you have been carrying for years is finally answered. I had asked, "Can someone love me for who I am, rather than what I represent?" James's answer had been no, not because he had known what I represented, but because when he thought I was no one, he had treated me as disposable. He had calculated that Isabel Vandermeer's $20 billion was worth more than 2 years of a relationship with a woman he thought was unremarkable. He was wrong about the numbers. He was wrong about everything. My grandfather and I walked down the aisle of the Cathedral of St. Edvard in Vienna, through the corridor of imperial guards, past 800 guests who stood in total silence, out through the great oak doors and into the afternoon light. A convoy of armored vehicles was arranged outside the cathedral, 22 of them, all black, all carrying the Hartenberg imperial crest in gold. The lead vehicle, a customized armored limousine, had its door already open. I looked up at the sky. Vienna in the afternoon, in October, with the light that particular shade of gold that the city does better than anywhere else. I took a breath. My grandfather looked at me. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said. "I am all right." "You wore a beautiful dress for a man who did not deserve it," he said. "The dress deserved the occasion," I said. "He simply was not equal to it." My grandfather made a sound that was as close to a laugh as he usually managed. "Come," he said. "We are going home." We got into the car. The door closed. The convoy moved. James Whitmore's Berlin acquisition collapsed 3 weeks after the cathedral. Without the Alpine Meridian capital commitment, the deal fell through. The Berlin firm he had been acquiring was subsequently approached by a competitor and acquired at a significantly lower valuation than the terms James had negotiated. Whitmore Systems, without its internationalization strategy, entered a period of stagnation from which, 18 months later, it had still not recovered. James was forced to step down as CEO when the board lost confidence in his strategic direction. He remains on the company's board in an advisory capacity, which is the kind of title given to people for whom a more meaningful role cannot be justified. The Vandermeer Maritime Group's regulatory audit lasted 16 months, not 14. 3 of their port contracts were revoked entirely following compliance failures discovered during the review. The family was forced to sell 2 vessels to cover the resulting cash flow gap. The credit line was not renewed by the Continental Banking Consortium. Isabel Vandermeer and James Whitmore, who had walked out of a cathedral together, were separated within 4 months. There was no announcement. They simply stopped appearing at the same events. I heard all of this from my grandfather's aides, who tracked such things as a matter of professional thoroughness. I did not follow up. I had no need to. I am in Hartenberg now. I have been here for 6 months. The work is substantial and real, and genuinely meaningful. I am being formally prepared to assume a greater role in the imperial governance structure, which is more interesting and more demanding than any graduate program I have ever attended. I am learning things that cannot be learned in a classroom, and I am grateful for them. I still listen to Brahms. My grandfather asked me, 2 weeks after Vienna, whether I regretted the experiment, whether 2 years spent as Clara Hartley had been worth what it cost. I said yes, without hesitation, because I learned something I needed to learn. I learned that love that requires ignorance is not love. It is transaction. It is calculation. James Whitmore did not fall out of love with me when he chose Isabel. He chose Isabel because he had never understood that what he had with me was real, because he had never understood that real things do not come labeled. True power does not announce itself. It does not defend itself. It does not need to. It walks into a cathedral when it is needed, at the pace it chooses, and it says what is true, and then it leaves. My grandfather walked the length of the Cathedral of St. Edward and destroyed 2 empires without raising his voice. He did it with documents, with facts, with the quiet application of authority that had been building for 41 years. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He simply revealed the structure of the world as it actually was, beneath the surface of what people had allowed themselves to believe. James Whitmore thought he was standing at an altar, making a bold choice. He was standing at the edge of a territory he did not know was owned, making a speech to an audience that included the man who owned it. That is the story. And now, I want to hear what you thought. Did that moment, when my grandfather walked into the cathedral in his imperial uniform and began methodically dismantling everything James Whitmore had built, feel like the justice it was? Did you feel the satisfaction of watching a man who called the wrong woman a dead weight discover that he had just destroyed himself in front of the one person with the power to confirm that destruction permanently? If this story of patience, identity, and the kind of revenge that is executed quietly but lands absolutely made your day better, smash that like button. Share this with everyone who believes that what you see on the surface is never the whole story. And subscribe so you never miss a single chapter of karma, crowns, and the devastating precision of power that does not need to announce itself.